Hi guys, this is Mark. In this video, I will walk you through and describe how social logins and the corresponding API works in Backendless so you can start using it in your applications. A social login is also known as OAuth2 login because that's the name of the specification. And it is a very commonly used functionality in a lot of applications where you want to provide an ability for the users to use their existing identities as they exist with some external services. And for example, you very frequently see applications that provide an ability to log in with users Google, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, GitHub, you name it, all kinds of accounts. And in here, the process is a little more involved than basic login with Backendless for the reason that when you initiate that login, there is a third-party server, essentially the server where the identities are stored and managed is involved. And there is a special process that is in place to coordinate that authentication with that external server. In Backendless, we provide out-of-the-box integration with about 24 different OAuth2 services. You can see a list of all of them that are built in if you go to in Backendless console to the users section and then select login providers. Here you see a list of all the ones that are included and supported out of the box. And if you need to have a custom login provider, you can actually add one by clicking this add new login provider, give it a name. For instance, if it is a demo provider, it's a rather lengthy form to fill out. We will not be doing it in this video. Instead, we will focus on some of the ones that are actually built in. And the ones that I have prepared a demo for are going to be Twitter and LinkedIn. They're fairly straightforward to set up. In fact, pretty much all the ones that we have in here are fairly straightforward because, for instance, if you take Facebook, just only 3 fields to provide, 2 of them are required. Or if you take, for instance, Google, it is also fairly simple. This is not the only setup you will need to do. You will actually have to do the configuration on the provider side. And then I will demonstrate how that would work with LinkedIn and Twitter. The process will be fairly similar with all other providers. Some are more involved, some are simpler. It really depends how complex any given authentication provider made it. We will start with Twitter. And here I have already configured it with an API key and API secret on the Backendless side. On the Twitter side, if you go to the Twitter developer section, you can just Google Twitter developer portal and you'll find the link. You need to have a Twitter account. Once you get in there, you will be presented with an interface that is similar to this. You will need to configure, create a project, and inside of this project here, my project is demo app, and in this project you can create multiple apps. The app that I created is called Backendless Demo App. It's very, very straightforward on this side. If you go into the actual app within your Twitter project, you'll be presented with an interface where you have to configure and describe what it is and what it does and so on. And at some point, you will be presented with the actual consumer keys. And then these are the keys that are presented to you once, so you can copy them. And these are the keys that you will be copying into Backendless console. It is very important, pretty much with every single provider, they will be asking you for the callback URL. And the same thing happened here with Twitter. The callback URL is actually embedded somewhere inside, but you will see it. And whenever you are presented with a field that is asking you for the callback URL, you will need to use the URL that is shown here on this interface. Now, once you have it all set up, using the API is actually very straightforward. Again, for the demo purposes, I will be using UI Builder because it makes it so much easier. If you're doing it in your native Android or iOS or a web application, the process is going to be almost identical. In fact, our documentation describes the whole process. You can just follow the APIs, follow the documentation and see what the APIs are like. But in here, I will switch to the front-end section. And I do have a page where I added two buttons. One is login with LinkedIn, and the other is login with Twitter. So let's start with the Twitter, and then we'll move on to LinkedIn. So login with Twitter, I select the button, and let's go into the logic for this button and add the on-click event. In here, under users API in the backend list section, if you go into users API, you will see this block that says OAuth user login. Take it out, and the block is very simple. The first thing that is required is the provider code. So what is provider code? For this, let's go back to the actual login provider configuration and select Twitter. And notice that at the very top, it says reference encode Twitter. And then for most of these, the name of the actual provider is going to be just like you expect. But always verify that you are using exactly as it is written here with the same upper or lowercase letters, exactly as is shown here. So the login provider for Twitter is Twitter. Let's go back to our logic. And for the login with Twitter, we will include the provider code, which will be Twitter. And one other thing, whenever you use a UI Builder, you can specify redirect page. And what redirect page is a page that will be presented once the user is logged in. And for this, I did prepare a page that says that has the name logged in. And in here, there is just a text. And then in this text, I will be using logic to basically say hello, and I get the name of the person that is logged in. So that's the only dynamic behavior on this page. But this is the page that I expect to see once I go through the login process. And your application could actually be the main page of the application or whatever you decide it to be. Let's go back to my social login page, and then in the login with Twitter button, I will specify the redirect page. And that page name, as we said, is logged in. That's it. So this takes care of the whole process. And let's see how that works. So now we have this page, and then clicking login with Twitter. This initiates the actual process of logging in. I'm going to log in into my Twitter account and then give the permission to authorize the app that is requesting the login. And this is the name of the app as I configured it in my developer portal for Twitter. Click authorize app. And that's it. It logged me in, and it is redirecting me to the page logged in. And as you can see here, it is already greeting me by my username that comes from Twitter. So here, by integrating with Twitter, I already got the information that came from Twitter, and now it is part of my backendless application. In fact, if I switch to the backend section and then look in the user's storage, notice that there is this record right here where the name is Codeless Coder, and this is the account that was created by me logging in through Twitter. In fact, there is a special column that is called social account, and you'll see that the social account for users that are created in console or users who registered with backendless registration API, the social account is backendless. For users that have authenticated and logged in through a social login, the social account will say OAuth. So that's the designation that identifies that that user has logged in through the social login. Now you will notice that in the email column there is this ID, and this is rather specific to Twitter. So Twitter login or Twitter social login, whenever it's used through the API, Twitter does not return the email address of the actual user. They return that code. And that's very specific to Twitter. They just how they do it. And as a result, this I know looks rather strange that in the email we have this ID, but the reason this ID shows up here is because the email is an identity column here. And as a result, this value is put in there. But at this point, the user is logged in and can start using the application, and any properties that Twitter returned, which really is not a whole lot, unlike many other providers, are available for your application. You can identify this user and do whatever is needed with that user. So that was Twitter. Now, let's also review what the process would be with LinkedIn, which is a little bit different and more similar to other providers like Facebook and Google. And in here, I already configured my login provider for LinkedIn. And these are the client ID and client secret. And with LinkedIn, I'm going to go into the LinkedIn configuration section. Once again, you can just Google LinkedIn developer portal, and in there you will be presented again with an interface to create an app, and you will have to associate that app with a page in LinkedIn. And then there is an approval process, so you can go through the process as it is described by LinkedIn. In there, once you have it all configured, there is a section called OAuth. And in here, you will see that there is a client ID and client secret. This is the information that was copied from LinkedIn into Backendless. And then from Backendless into LinkedIn, I had to specify this authorized redirect URL. And this is the URL that is presented to you by Backendless console. So you take this, put it into LinkedIn, and then you take the client ID and client secret and put it into Backendless. So that's how you basically exchange that information. Also with LinkedIn and really with all OAuth providers, there is a concept of a scope. And scope is really just a name that identifies the kind of permissions that you will be granting to any app that is logging in with your, let's in this case, LinkedIn application. By default, with LinkedIn, there are no scopes. So you can create the application, you get your client ID and client secret, but there is not a lot that you can do. What you need to do with LinkedIn is switch to products, and then here under edit products, there's going to be empty list. Under additional available products, there is a list of basically all these three guys. And what you need to do is basically claim it and say, okay, I would like to use sign in with LinkedIn. It's not given to you by default. Then there is a little approval process again. Once it is all done and that product is added to your LinkedIn application, you can start logging in. Now, another thing to keep in mind, if I switch back, with all of these scopes, there are certain properties that are returned to you. For instance, this R-Lite profile scope with LinkedIn, it means that you can get some basic information about the user. So in here, you will see that with these scopes, these are the properties that you can get from LinkedIn. Like with R-Lite profile, you can get the name and the photo. With R_email address, you can get the primary email address associated with the LinkedIn account. Knowing what those properties are may be important if you really want to get a hold of that information. And that's something that we're going to look into a little bit later. But first, let's get the basic login with LinkedIn working from Backendless. So in here, back in the front end section, I do have a button. Let me get to the login with LinkedIn button. And in here, I already configured it with the same OAuth user login block. So it's the same codeless block that applies to all login providers. And then here, the provider code is LinkedIn. I got it from the login providers page and the same redirect page. So let's run this page and see how the login with LinkedIn will work in UI Builder. Let's run this page and then use login with LinkedIn. So now it prompts me to log in to my LinkedIn account. click sign in, a login happens, and then I'm redirected to the page, the same login page. But now notice that it uses actually my name because it pulled that name from LinkedIn, and now information about the user, in this case it is me, is in the backend list database. Let's take a look in the user's storage, and you will notice that this record right here, it has my email address, it has my name, it will still show OAuth as the social account, and at this point it is just a valid user with a record in backend list database in our user management facility. So this is cool because we're using exactly the same codeless block to communicate both with Twitter and LinkedIn. Now, let's go back to LinkedIn and then take a look at these things a little bit further. So let's take this R-Lite profile and Google R-Lite profile fields. So in here, the very first link will give you the user, the API documentation of the fields that you will be getting back when you have this R-Lite profile. And this scope is automatically given to you. So these are the properties that you can use. The cool thing in our integration is that you can actually specify how these properties will be mapped to the properties in your users table in backend list. So for instance, if we want to take localized first name, all right, or if we want to take picture profile, if we want to take any of these, we can specify what column will contain values whenever they come back from LinkedIn. And this is how this will work. Back in UI Builder, and we'll take a look at the login with LinkedIn. I actually have a function that I stored previously, and then let's take this guy, remove it from here, put it in here. Just ignore that little thing that I did. I saved it as I was preparing for the video. But what we have here is that notice that there is a parameter or input parameter in this block called field mappings. And by the way, it's going to be present in all our SDKs. What field mappings are is an instruction to backend lists to map properties as they come back from provider to the names of the columns that need to be created in backend lists. And in this case, there's a lot in here. But first of all, let's start with the simpler ones. Localized first name. So localized first name, as we can see, is a property that comes back from LinkedIn. It will contain the localized version of the first name field. And what we have, the mapping, is that anything that comes from LinkedIn in that property will be stored in a column that I named F name. Anything that is in the property picture profile will be stored in the column profile picture. Okay, so what is profile picture in LinkedIn? Let's take a look. So we have this profile picture, and it says it's metadata about members picture profile. So if we go into this link just to get more information, you will see that it is actually a structure. It's going to be a JSON structure that comes back. So what we can do is we can take the whole JSON and store it in backend list. There are a lot of properties here, but you will notice that for most of them, in fact for all, it says this field requires special permissions available only to select partners. So in reality, what you're going to be getting back for picture profile is only this display image, because this one is included. But we will store it just for demonstration purposes, because I want to demonstrate how field mappings work in backend list. So what we are doing is we're saying profile picture field coming from LinkedIn will be stored in the profile picture column in backend list. Now this one is rather interesting. So it says profile picture / display image. So this one is different for the reason that profile picture coming from LinkedIn is the JSON object. And that JSON object internally will contain display image property. In fact, here's their sampler response. All right, so here's the profile picture JSON, and notice that it contains this display image property. So whenever you want to drill down into specific property in that JSON that comes back from the provider, normally you would use dot. In our case, you have to use // because dot was conflicting with something. As a result, the notation is that you use // to kind of traverse the JSON tree. So whatever is contained within display image is going to be stored in the display image column. In my users table, if we go to schema, I already created this fname column for the first name, for the localized first name. Profile picture is of type JSON, and display image is of type string. So now, if we go back to this page and rerun login with LinkedIn, it will actually not work out of the box for the reason that I'm already logged in with LinkedIn, and there is actually a token that is established. So what I need to do in order to see it working, number one, I will need to go back to data browser and delete my LinkedIn account because I will want to redo it from scratch. Click delete here. And then now on my phone, I'm actually going to be logging into LinkedIn and then ending that user session because there is no other way to do it. So in my LinkedIn app, and unfortunately I cannot share the screen of my phone on the computer, but what I'm doing right now is I'm basically going in to see all my active sessions, and I will be ending the one that I did actually 7 minutes ago when I demonstrated the login with LinkedIn. So that session has ended, and now if I rerun this page and log in with LinkedIn again, it's done. All those properties were fetched from LinkedIn and copied into backendlets. Let's take a look. Let me drag these properties. So for instance, profile picture, I'll move it all the way to the top. And same thing with display image. Display image. And here's my fname. So notice that here, profile picture, which is JSON, this is what LinkedIn returned. This is the display image URN that we got from LinkedIn and stored in backendless. The localized first name is Mark, and this is what's inside of the display image that is inside of the profile picture, and it's just the actual URN. So the point of this was to demonstrate that you can retrieve more data than what's available on the surface from a login provider and store it in the user record in backendless. That's all I have prepared for you today for the social logins. The subject is enormous because we could create similar videos for many other providers. And yes, they will be useful, but my hope was that by demonstrating it with LinkedIn and Twitter, I gave you enough data pointers so you can go in and start messing with it and actually figuring out how to configure it on the provider side, because most of the configuration is on the provider side. As far as backendless, it's very straightforward. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, happy backendless coding.